do multiple tours there just because there is so much that you miss stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
So we usually take the RCA group down there after the rite of election.
I was wondering, because we did that when I went through.
Yeah.
I didn't know Grant wanted to do that.
Yeah, well, see, he'll go to the rite of election, then we'll have to do that there afterwards.
We're planning to go to Mass there the next morning after the final Easter vigil.
Oh, okay.
Just to do some pictures and
Okay.
go to Mass there.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
kind of make it a ceremony since he's not with all the kids.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, you can still come hang out with the kids, though, too, when they would do all that stuff. They would picture stuff then, too, but yeah. Well, all right. Well, thank you. Well, thanks for coming. We are here again at Bob the Father. I don't know how many episodes this is. This seems like a lot by now, but who knows? So again, this is open forum. Any questions you have, feel free to ask, and I'll do the best to answer them. If I don't know, I'll write them down and put an answer online later. There was a good question last week about the difference between a chapel, an oratory, and a church. And so I found the candies in here, and I put them on the comment section on both the YouTube and Facebook channel. So you can check that out. Primarily, the only difference is a oratory is kind of it's like, think of like St. Anselm's. That's where like the Benedictines have their mass, but it's open to the public, and people come there and worship and celebrate with them. That's different than like a chapel where like the monastery on Clayton for the Carmelites, right? That's a chapel. That's really designated just for that order. So that's kind of really the real difference between those two. So it can be kind of confusing, and sometimes you don't really know until you actually go and see what they say. So very good. Questions, comments?
Isn't there a church/chapel/ some other definition where the people that live there go in front of where you can as a public person?
So yeah, so that's considered a chapel because so the same there. At that monastery for the Carmelites, the sisters are cloistered, right? So like, okay, so you can go to, let's say, like the Pink Sisters, right? You can go to the Pink Sisters chapel, Grace Chapel, but you can't go past a certain point. And so that area closest to the sanctuary is cloistered, and so that area is primarily called the chapel. The whole thing is really called the chapel, but there are certain dispensations can be given. So that's kind of one of them. But really, when we think of like more of cloistered orders, that they're like out away from everybody, they live their life separately, that's properly called a chapel. So yeah, even the monastery and the Pink Sisters, because it's open to the public, could be considered an oratory. But there's kind of a loose definition of one of those things. Pretty much they use them interchangeably a lot, but that's really the primary difference according to Canada.
So one of the things I learned after our tour, the Pope was here in 1999, I guess it was. I didn't realize that the basilica meant that the Pope had been there, that you're a cathedral and a basilica are two different.
Yeah, they can be the same. You can have a church that's also a basilica and a cathedral.
Yeah.
But typically, okay, so there's only one cathedral in every diocese.
Right.
That's it. You can only have one cathedral. But you could have multiple basilicas.
Yeah, right. So we have two.
Well, actually, we have three.
Three?
We have we have the Cathedral Basilica on Lindell. We have what's affectionately known as the Old Cathedral, or
right.
It's called the Basilica of St. Louis, King of France, is the proper title. And then actually St. John the Evangelist is actually what they call a minor basilica. And so the difference is, with a basilica, you'll always find what they call an umbrellino. So it's like a umbrella-looking thing. They usually put like somewhere in the sanctuary or wherever. That shows the status of a basilica. What the status of a cathedral though is like a little bell. And I think it's called the tenebra.
Oh yeah.
Tenebrel. So that's like just a little bell. And that's actually defines it as a cathedral. Right? So you only have one bell, but you have multiple umbrellas. Marilyn, you're going to say something?
What does basilica really mean?
Well, so basilica is kind of this designated honorific title for a particular church that has some special significance for the community, for the diocese. They have a special ministry that goes on. You also will find a chair for the bishop in those basilicas. So if you go to the old cathedral, if you walk in, on the right is the presider's chair, but behind the ambo, there's a chair that has the coat of arms of the bishop, right? That's the only person that sits in that chair is the archbishop. Same thing as St. John the Evangelist. There's another chair that's put into the sanctuary that has his coat of arms. Only the archbishop was allowed to sit in that chair.
They were saying even when the Pope came that he'd have a separate chair.
Yes.
Only the archbishop
Yeah.
could
So
sit in
technically
that chair.
speaking, so the Pope has the right to sit in the cathedral. He has that right, but he doesn't necessarily have to. The cathedra is for the bishop of the particular diocese. So he could. So the Pope had every right to, but I think because of his humility, he decided not to. And so that's really So he could have, but he didn't.
Well, his chair was kind of on display from
Yeah, it's a relic now.
Oh,
Yeah.
I remember when my daughter came to visit and said,
Yeah.
the chair
Well, that was under glass. Yeah, it's under glass now. Back down in the
Back then it wasn't.
Yeah. Right. Now it's down in the museum, and the reason that it's down there is the glass because now it's sort of third class relic. So a third class relic is anything that's been touched by a saint. Right? So there's a big discussion about what to do with the bed at the archbishop's residence. Right. So I don't know what they ever decided. I'm not sure what to do with that. So, but yeah, anything that the saint touches becomes a relic, and it should be given due honor and veneration.
But there should have been classes of relics?
There's different classes. So like a first class relic would be something that was usually it's like a piece of the saint, either like a piece of clothing or a piece of bone or part of the body. There's been a practice over the years that hasn't been really as condoned as much recently for obvious reasons. A second class relic is something that was owned by the saint, so it could be like a Bible or a breviary or whatever. And then a third class relic is anything that's touched those other two. Right?
But it's the saints, not Pope or any of the
Saints,
holy
just
religious
saints. Yeah, saints, right. Or like for instance, if you go to the Holy Land, a lot of different spots are what you consider to be relic makers, right? So like if you were to take, let's say, a rosary and put it on the spot of the birth of Jesus, or take it up to the Calvary or to the tomb and just lay it on those places, that then becomes a relic. Yeah. And not just a relic, right? It actually becomes more than a relic. It actually becomes what's the topic? But anyway, it becomes kind of a specialized thing that really should be venerated and kept in proper place. So. Sacramental and a relic. Sacramental and a relic, yeah. So you don't need a priest to do that. So if we were to take that.
For example, I had a rosary and I went to the Holy Land. And I went to some of these holy places and I touched my rosary against one of these holy places.
Yep.
It's now
Yes.
Or is it circular?
Both.
Both.
Yeah. So it had to be disposed of properly too, which means it had to be either burned or buried in order to actually be properly disposed. You can't just throw it. Good. That's the proper place for it. That's good. Yeah. Also some people go as far as needing a reliquary, right? Like a place where you put these things.
Right.
And you can do that too. Right? There's a lot of it. We have them upstairs and in the church, and seminary has a large one. If you ever go to the seminary, you go to the doors, go to the left down the hallway. There's a big one, looks like a bookcase against the wall. They have tons in there. I think they have all the 12 apostles. St. Louis Corps, some of the saints are found in this area. So, yeah. Pretty
So, the limousine that you used when you was here,
interesting.
did you bring that from Rome or was that just a local?
That's a good question. I would imagine it'd be local.
So that's now a relic.
I mean, yes, but also like what happened to it. I mean, the other thing too is like it's kind of keeping track of these things too. So I don't know if that was part of the fleet. I don't know if that was like kind of set aside. I don't know who handled that.
Of course, you don't know they're going to be the same after they're gone. So, like dishes and silverware,
Right.
The cup and
Right.
glass. And
So
no idea
yeah.
what-
So also too, there's a process of actually what we call profaning, right? So profane, like all profanely means to make it used for common use, right? So where let's say you were to buy to sell off a church, right? You want to deconsecrate or profane the sanctuary and the altar because the altar it could be not be used for the table. Right? You could do there's a right to do that, and they may have done, I don't know if they've done that. It's a good question though. I mean, there's other questions like what about this and this and this. Yeah, I mean, there could be a lot of relics out there.
All was closed.
Yeah, it could be a lot of relics out there we had no idea right now. Yeah, so yeah.
That's interesting. I haven't touched it.
Yep.
So if we skip around, like the church in St. Louis has become a skateboard.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was, it was desanctified.
Yeah, deconsecrated and profaned, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember when that was actually sold. That was,
Well,
yeah.
Oh, was that the old St. Mark's over in American Theater?
No. This place up in North City. It was it Luminous or was it Our Lady? No, not Petrol.
Whatever.
Yeah, there was a church up north that was
It was in the news recently.
yeah. So they made it into a skate park.
Huh.
But you still have all like it still looks like a church from the inside and outside, and even like the structure is also there. Obviously, the altar is not there. A lot of the things that would make a church have been consecrated and profaned. But yeah, it's kind of weird because you go in there and it's like, oh, looks like church, and people are skating around on it and doing tricks or whatever, and there's graffiti and everything all over the place. Part of that is I don't know how much the archdiocese had involvement with that. I don't know what kind of agreements took place. Like for instance, like take the old St. Boniface, right, which is down there on off of Alabama, right down Michigan. Yeah,
It's a theater.
it's in the patch. Yeah, so now it's a theater, but part of the stipulation of actually having a theater is that there's no pornographic or lewd kind of things being portrayed. And that was part of the agreement, actually using that space as a theater. I don't know what happened. I don't know if that was the same thing happened there. I would imagine that's probably changed hands a few times now, and so possibly that agreement got lost at some point. The archdiocese probably have a record, but I don't know how that would work today. If we have a claim to say, oh well, you guys didn't follow the rules, so we should take that back.
And how does that start? Is it just they don't have enough people going there and there's
That's
other churches in the area?
There's other factors. So like, part of it is population shift. Part of it is financial. So, if you look downtown, for the first, 5 blocks going up the river, you have 5 different Catholic churches, right? I mean, you throw a stone, you people have a Catholic church downtown. The reason that is because you have these different cultural elements coming into St. Louis at one time, and because of, I don't know, distrust or whatever, maybe some biases, whatever they be, we had different churches built around these different communities of cultural centers. So you have like the Irish church and the German church, and the Italian church and the French church, and so all these people would also sometimes also bring their own priests. So they would build up the churches downtown, and they would be their designated church. Well, as time goes on, of course, people leave, right? People travel farther out, crime, whatever else happens, and so the population shifts. And so now you're stuck with all these churches. Some now are historical, but there's nobody going to them, right? So what do? Well, you could sell them off. You could try to get them registered with the historical society, so maybe you can get some income for that to keep it up. But it only goes so far. And that's kind of one of the big discussions we're doing now planning these issues. Like, what's the future of our archdiocese going to look like? with all these different churches, with less priests, and kind of declining Catholic population. Right? So this isn't the first time we've been through this. I mean, this would happen several times over the course of the last centuries. But that's basically what the choice would be. Do we sell off the property, and then we take whatever this territory was in the parish, and that combines, or is it broken up into many different parish boundaries? The boundaries change. Those are all questions that would be done at either a parish or archdiocese level. If they decide to sell off the church, they would deconsecrate it, and then usually take anything that was kind of some importance or value and put it in the reclamations office. And then other churches could take it and do it, use them, or whatever else. And then they would sell it off to maybe the higher bidder, or they also give stipulations like this can only be used for certain things. You kind of limit the value there in a way, right? If you're talking about specific things, not ahead of any sellers then, but you also want to make sure that you maintain the integrity of what was going on there. I mean, even though you consecrate or profane it, it still seems kind of odd to look around and see, like, you know, these kind of structures are very Gothic in nature, but now you've got kids skating around used to be a native, right? It's kind of odd. It's just weird.
I think there's one in town that became a marketing agency.
That could be. Well, you're
Like Creve Coeur, Webster, or something.
could be. Well, I mean, one recently was Holy Innocents over in Kings Highway. Speaking of Holy Innocents, the Feast of Holy Innocents. That now is a church for, I think, is it the Gathering? I can't remember.
Oh, yeah.
So that's Bloomington Church, but it's not a Catholic church.
It's not. Why do you think there's such a decline in Catholic population? Is it just
Well, I don't know if it's a decline. I think it's more, there's a decline in general of the population in St. Louis too. So if you see where there's a shift really farther out west, and you see where the Catholics are growing, the same place where the population is growing. So St. Charles, Wentzville, you know, even kind of down south, you know, closer south. So these like Imperial, these areas are growing, and so you see a shift in population out there. But if you look at the parish boundaries out there, they're huge, right? Compared to the boundaries here in St. Louis, we're relatively small. Just because we have so many churches here, and that's really what we're going to be looking at over the next couple of years, saying, okay, do we need that many churches or parishes in this area? Or do we need more parishes out west? And then also there's a question about what happens if the population shifts back, which could possibly happen in the future, no one really knows. And so do we want to maintain some kind of structures that are still here, so if that comes back, we can easily define new boundaries.
That's a hot topic with people too. If they came to one parish and they get merged with another.
Well, and like here, I mean, you know, St. Gabriel as a for instance, I mean, you have founding families still here, right? And so now I don't think anything's going to happen here, but that's not out of all possibility. And if there were to be a change, how would that affect people that have grown up here, who've been here, you know, from the very beginning? Yeah, right. I don't know. I mean, I think part of that is that's why the focus right now is on evangelization. It's really kind of reaching out and gathering with other parishes to kind of see where we can actually work together on certain things, but also kind of understand that, you know, we're all part of one church. You know, it's often talked about parochialism. There's a lot of good things about that, but also there's a lot of negative things, right? I think the good thing is it gives people a sense of identity in the community. Like, this is our parish, this is our community. This is, you know, it's kind of centered around that church, which is great. But I think also too, it tends to put up fences where there may not necessarily need to be, right? So in other words, well, okay, we're not going to interact with the Brayfield people because they're over there, and, you know, or the Epiphany. Oh, they're up there. We're going to leave them alone. We're just going to keep our own, you know, head down here and do what we got to do here.
Another way, in the sports community, the other parishes are embassies.
Right. Well, there's nothing wrong with a little healthy, you know, competition, but I think you see it more go negatively more often, you know, sometimes. So, yeah, it's and that's really going to be, I think, at the root of a lot of what's going to be happening in the next few years. Is where's that parochialism good, and where is that going to you have to knock down some walls.
You would expect that there's probably some finding from many who have understood all of it.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, with the exception of maybe the old but then again, all right. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean, a lot of these, it is interesting. Like some of the parishes in North City, there's not like they're not ministering to people who are living in those properties. The people who are going to mass up in North City are coming from other places because they grew up in that area. They maintain a relationship, which is great, right? But then the question is, well, how are we reaching out to that community that's there, to welcome them into our church, right? And you know, be open to them and love them and show the face of Jesus. I'm not to say I'm not doing that. I think they're doing a really great job. If you go to the priests up there, they're doing a wonderful job. But that's the same problem. The population up there is not as good as it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. So.
That's one of the things we talked about with the St. Matthew, because, you know, I mean, we can, there's sensitivity around being the white savior, right, and going into health versus how do we have events and things together to put it together.
Yeah, right.
And that's harder to do because some of our folks aren't comfortable going to that neighborhood. They're not comfortable or able to come to our neighborhood. So how does that work?
Yeah, and that's a question. I mean, I think part of it is, I think the first thing we have to realize is be not afraid. Right? That's the most commonly used phrase in the entire Bible. And I think that's part of it. Part of it is be not afraid. And so if you're not afraid, this stuff really kind of can overcome itself.
The first time that we went to St. Matthew's to stuff back, I literally told my son, I said, stay in the church, do not go outside. I was nervous, and then we've spent like a week up there collecting all these donations and handing them out, and 500 families came through picking up all this stuff. And you know, as we got to talk to everybody, and I had to drive some people home because this is a little ways walk, you couldn't carry. And you realize, like, sure, there's crime everywhere. You know, you have to be careful, but you shouldn't be afraid. Like, you just.
Yeah, I think that's kind of part. I think that's exactly right. Once you start fearing these complexes, like I don't want to feel like that. If you're doing good, that's never a bad thing. Right? If you're doing good for somebody or for a community or for anyone else, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, people may say, "Oh, well, maybe they have their own perception of that." Well, that's their problem. That's the way I look at it. I'm here to help, especially if we're invited, right? And that's one of the things about having a sister parish of North City, that we're open to each other to invite. And so, yeah, you're more than welcome to come here. You're always welcome to come here, as I hope you're always welcome to go there. I think that's a big part of it, is overcoming that fear. How will this work? Well, if you're doing good, who cares how it works? That's kind of my approach. I don't know if that's the best approach. Maybe that's not the most loving approach, but I think it's probably the most truthful approach.
So be not afraid is one of the most popular phrases in the Bible?
That's the most commonly used. It's used, I think, over 330 times in the Bible, in some variation. Either be not afraid, or be not fear, or some kind of aspect of that. Right. And so it's like in the main message of the Bible is God's trying to tell us, don't be afraid. Every time an angel appears, it's really the first thing they say. God, don't be afraid. Be not afraid. So I think that's the first step. But I mean, in the broader scheme too, I mean, evangelization is key for everyone. You can make arguments even here that we're not doing such a great job of that. I think everyone can do better in that respect. But right now, I'm just trying to develop the criteria to determine what's the best way forward. And so right now, there's nothing off the table as far as what could happen. And I know there's rumors already starting, and I wish they'd stop because that doesn't help anybody. And nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. So anything you hear about this place, no one knows. No idea. I don't know. Monsieur doesn't know.
Rumors about the future of our
like so I've heard already, like, oh, I've heard such and such place is closing. Okay. And my usual question is, can I ask you where you heard that from? And usually it's like somebody has no idea. Well, yeah. Or it's just like one of these things where it's like, okay, I can tell you, not even the Archbishop knows what's going on. So if he doesn't know, nobody else does.
Mm-hmm.
So
The problem with doing it now is people start digging in their heels for the parish that's being affected.
right.
Not
Right.
affected, but allegedly.
Well, I mean, I would say if I were a pastor, I think I'd be talking to the director probably maybe on a weekly basis, giving input, and not necessarily like trying to manipulate in some way, but like maybe just kind of right now it's kind of an open book. I mean, you can write your own script for the most part about what criteria you want to see from a parish and it would be beneficial. And part of that is there's going to be a wider community that's going to look at those things and make determinations that are primarily going to be lay people that are making these determinations. So, good. I think it would be, I think, unwise of the pastor not to be involved with this. Because I think some guys, they take the approach that have been through these before, that, oh, this is just another thing the other person going to do, and it's just going to be kind of white noise. Well, I don't know. I haven't been through enough to really know. I mean, I've seen it on the other end from the layperson perspective. But I think it'll be, when you have the power to kind of control the narrative and control the way things can go, it'd be wise to maybe be a part of that. I mean, I just practically speaking, that's just kind of, and I think a lot are, but we'll have to see. I think what they're trying to show is, no one can say we didn't try here. And no one can say we didn't try to get as much information from people as possible. And that's really what we're doing right now, is gathering information. So any input you have, I mean, obviously send it our way. We weren't happy to run the flagpole. But in about a month, there'll be a bigger group that is being picked to make some determination on these things. Yeah, if you're rumors, just tell them. Either dismiss them or tell them you don't know what you're talking about, because nobody knows what's going to happen.
Okay, I have a question. So, so the Pope introduced a new mystery in 2000, the Luminous mystery.
Yeah, John Paul, yes. Mm-hmm.
So, what does that mean, introducing a new mystery? What does that particular one mean? Why did he do it?
Yeah, so the luminous mysteries are actually centered on the life of Jesus and his ministry. So it starts with the baptism of the Lord, then it goes to the wedding feast of Cana. Then the third one is the preaching of the kingdom of God, the transfiguration, and then finally the institution of the Eucharist and Last Supper. Those are the 5 luminous mysteries. So if you look at the other mysteries, they kind of center around aspects of Jesus' life, primarily his birth, his death, and then his resurrection. Right? And so the Holy Father thought it good to introduce and make universal use of the actual life of Jesus and meditate upon those aspects of his life too. But here's the thing about the Rosary. You don't necessarily have to settle on just those 4 different mysteries. A lot of people make up their own. That's perfectly okay to do. The Rosary is a devotional, right? It's a devotional prayer. And so many times people are kind of encouraged to come with their own mystery of Jesus' life and contemplate that while they're praying. Now there is a standard kind of like, so Monday and Saturday are the joyful mysteries. Tuesday and Friday are the sorrowful. Wednesday and Sunday are the glorious. And then Thursday's the luminous. You could do that cycle, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But you could also make up your own. So some mothers, for instance, found it helpful maybe meditate on the first time of feeding Jesus. Right? Or maybe changing Jesus' diaper. Right? He's kind of the hidden life of Jesus between the time he was 2, 7, and 12, and then even 12 until 30. Right? There's a lot of that stuff we don't necessarily know about this, what we call the hidden life of Nazareth. I think I mentioned this before, but there was a YouTube video, which I thought very interesting, that posited that Jesus, after he turned 13, left Nazareth and kind of started his ministry in Arabia and India. So he kind of traveled throughout Persia and into India, spreading the gospel, talk about monotheism and God being our Father, and spreading message of mercy and love. And because of that, he was actually exiled from places, and even some of the Hindu priests in India tried to kill him. But they have ancient Sanskrit passages that kind of called up this man named Yeshua. He came and kind of preached and was almost killed several times by the authorities in that area. And then the thought that after he went through this area between his 13 and say 28, he then went back to Israel and started his mission there. So here's the thing. There's a weird thing about that. You can hold that as a Catholic. There's nothing contrary to the Catholic faith in saying that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe he could have. I mean, we don't know exactly what happened between the time he was 12 at the temple and the time he started his ministry at the age of 30. That's 18 years. It's a long time. We don't know. So yeah, I thought it was just an interesting posit. I mean, there's probably some credibility, and who knows as far as like the authenticity of some of these things. But I mean, is it possible? Sure. So yeah, so the mysteries can be any aspect of Jesus' life, death, resurrection. That's sort of mysterious. So we contemplate, we pray with.
So Luminous is adding his life.
Yeah, so Luminous is really directed towards his ministry. So from the baptism of Jesus to his Last Supper, basically.
How did that not get covered in all the hundreds of years?
Well, again,
why is it not until 2000?
Yeah. Well, again, you have to understand. Again, the Rosary itself was developed over time. It started with actually monastic practice of reciting all the Psalms on a daily basis. So the monks would actually recite a whole 150 Psalms over the course of the day.
So that would be more like the divine office.
Yes and no. There was still a distinction between the divine office and that. So the divine office was still 5 times a day you would do it, but you wouldn't do all the Psalms, right? There's only, from the very beginning, the divine office had been set up as certain Psalms for the morning, certain Psalms at night. Now you would get through all the Psalms within the 4-week cycle. But monks would actually recite all the Psalms on top of the office on a daily basis, right? And so to keep track, they would have these beads around their waist, right? Well, that kind of got reduced to, well, okay, more for the secular priest. Well, I can't do that all day. So maybe I just reduce that to 50 Hail Marys, 5 Our Fathers, and Lord's.
So it wasn't even the Psalms anymore.
No. By the time, let's see, I think it was Dominic Savio, I think was the one that kind of retraced that back into the actual rosary we may understand today. But yeah, that started with monastic practice and kind of morphed into these rote prayers that we would memorize, and then the mysteries actually kind of came later, right?
I was just going to say, did the joyful and sorrowful and glorious mysteries come all at once, or did they develop?
I'd have to research that. I don't know. That's a good question. I'll check that out and get back to you.
Because Luminous kind of added the remainder to it.
Filled the gap.
Right.
The gap in the middle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know when exactly the mysteries were introduced. A lot of times when we talk about devotionals, even liturgical stuff, right? If you've seen the liturgy, typically that kind of is like starts with a grassroots thing, and then it kind of just grows into the practice of the community, right? We call that a cult practice, right? That it starts kind of with a group of people, and then just kind of expands out to everyone else.
Well, for instance, what about the Church of the Mercy? It's the 20th century.
Yes, there was Saint Faustina Kowalska, right? And that was 1930s, right? So in her diary, she talked about the Divine Mercy Chapel. But even that didn't come really about until John Paul II was made Pope, and then canonized Saint Faustina, and really championed Divine Mercy with the institution of Divine Mercy Sunday, right? So that wasn't really until early 2000s that Divine Mercy Sunday was actually Divine Mercy Sunday, right? So yeah, I mean, it all develops organically. It usually takes like some pope or bishop or somebody to actually like kind of cauterize it, for lack of a better word, kind of like just solidify it into the daily practice, whatever it may
'cause that's not a light decision.
No, but
That's-
but the devotion devotions are always been kind of open with those things, right? Devotionals are nevertheless like there's no obligation to pray the rosary every day. No one's going to put a gun to your head and say, "Oh, you sin mortally if you don't pray the Divine Chaplet every day." These are devotional things that kind of help us to elevate ourselves and grow in the mystery and understanding it.
So it's like adding value.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not a
Right.
requirement.
It's considered merit. I mean, it's considered merit for you, sure, but it's not obligatory.
Mhm.
And that's why mysteries can be whatever you want. You know, when it comes to those. But yeah, that's good. Quite. I have to look at that.
I look at Divine Mercy, it's interesting that it took a Polish pope
Yeah.
to resurrect that.
Right.
It's a-
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I'm sure in Poland that was probably a common practice. I'm sure the Divine Mercy probably spread from the 1930s on, and then of course John Paul II, Carol Tito, being influenced by that, would have brought that into a pontificate.
Well, it was my understanding that it did get out of Poland and when it got to Rome, we thought she was talking about herself. Because the translation was so clear, it wasn't until JP2 came in and said,
Right.
let's take a Republican.
Right. Yeah. But that's why it usually starts. Usually it's more regional, and then it kind of. I mean, even on our church calendar, certain saints we celebrate. Right. That's up to the individual bishops to determine what they want to celebrate on those days. I mean, some things are universal, like Christmas. You can't necessarily change that. Easter, you can't necessarily change that. But let's say if there was like a obscure saint that maybe had a great devotion here in St. Louis, but like nowhere else. The Archbishop would say, we're going to celebrate that saint Mass that way. Right? Even though maybe the surrounding diocese would not. The Archbishop and the Bishop has a lot of authority when it comes to this.
Is that typically changed from Archbishop to Archbishop?
Yes and no. I guess it could, depending on the devotion that the particular Archbishop has. But for the most part, they're really more regional. So, like, obviously, we would celebrate Vincent de Paul because he's a secondary patron. Where maybe in, I don't know, South America, like, or Paraguay, maybe they won't. Right? Rose Philippine Shen, obviously, she's more tailored to the United States than probably any other country. So here in the United States, she has much more of a cult devotion than maybe, let's say, Europe, right? So I think it would just depend on the region and what's being already celebrated by people at the time. I mean, one of the big ones is Ascension Thursday. That's always a huge debate, right? Because the Bishops' Council here in the United States have decided that that you can push that back to the following Sunday. But some dioceses don't. They keep it on that Thursday. If an archbishop came in here and said, we want to put it back to Thursday, okay. That's prerogative. Now, I imagine there's good reason to say it should be on Thursday, primarily because it's the only time that's been given in the Bible. 40 days after the resurrection, Ascension Thursday is always going to be a Thursday, so whatever. But they're looking at from a pastoral stance that are you putting more of a burden on the people by having them go through another Holy Day of obligation on a Thursday, or they have to come Sunday? I don't know if that's the best argument.
50 years ago, there was no consideration.
I'm kind of the same. I'm kind of the same mindset. I'm kind of like, well, it's a Holy Day of obligation for a reason, right? I mean, we have other Holy Day of obligation fall differently. So why is this any different? But apparently there was some decision made that may be too burdensome. I don't know. But we'll see. I think the current Archbishop Mansky, I don't know what he's going to do. He comes from the Northeast, which actually they typically have it on Thursday. But that hasn't really been a tradition here since the change. But I don't know if that really should be a deciding factor or not. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, another way of looking at it is, even though it was on a Thursday, we could celebrate it any day. Or not.
How do you mean?
Well, if you want to celebrate, all of a sudden celebrated the 4th of July,
Mm-hmm.
can you choose that day to celebrate Ascension? The Ascension of the Lord?
Well, I no, because I think the problem is the Ascension of the Lord falls within the Easter season. And there'd be no way we could celebrate Easter by the 4th of July. It would just be mathematically impossible. You'd be in the throes of ordinary time by then. I mean, yeah, the church picks these dates for particular reasons, right? Well, I mean, there's actually, it's funny. I just read this book about about Christmas, some traditions that we actually have for Christmas, and there's a big discussion about why the 25th. And I think we talked about this in some ways, but there's evidence maybe that that the fact that the shepherds were tending their flock at night would indicate it's more springtime, would be warmer outside, not as cold as it would be in winter. Now, you could say, well, maybe it was just an unseasonably warm winter that year, who knows? But also the fact that it was also positive that maybe the shepherds were actually tending the lambs for the Passover sacrifice. And that kind of coincides Jesus' birth with the Passover, right? So it's kind of a full circle that Jesus would die and be born and die around the same time. I don't know. But there also is good evidence to say that actually is the 25th, not just because of the pagan enculturation around the time, but also there's evidence to say that even the incensing that was done by Zechariah for the birth of John the Baptist, it was thought that would have been done on Yom Kippur, which is around September. And so the time John the Baptist was conceived would have been September, born in June, and we're told in the Bible that Mary remained with Jesus, with Elizabeth for 3 months after John's birth. So there are some, if you do the math, and you kind of see, well, does this kind of line up with the winter season? And the 25th seems to be one of those numbers where it probably could be. I think, unfortunately, we just will never know, because a lot of that's going back to this is what the early Christians celebrated, and it's when they did it. So they would have known better than we would, because they actually lived back then. But I think there's arguments for and against. But the dating is usually for that particular reason, right? Because, if you go the 25th of December, 9 months early is March 25th. That's always going to be the Annunciation. We know that the Easter time would have coincided with the Jewish Passover, and so that date is always going to be somewhat around that area. And so it would make sense the Ascension would fall during that time too.
Did they even have the same calendar?
Well, who?
With the birth of Jesus.
Well, what do you mean? Like, no. So the one we have today.
365 days of the year.
Well, so the calendar we have today is not the same calendar they would have had. Well, let's put it this way: it wouldn't be the same calendar either the Romans or the Jewish people would have had back then. Because you understand too, the Jewish people had a separate calendar which was lunar based, while
They still do.
well they do liturgically, and then the Romans would have had a solar calendar. Right, so it is interesting though that the years when this all happened, those calendars tend to coincide with each other. So that's very interesting. But over time, there was the Julian calendar, which actually the Orthodox still follow, like dating Christmas and that kind of thing. We follow the Gregorian calendar, which is really more mathematically accurate. That determines, based on the rotation around the sun. So no, we actually lost 15 days. Right around the 15th century, in the middle of October. They were taken out because the Gregorian calendar was introduced. And so, huh? Oh, I don't know. I think it's just about I think it's probably just more about the job. But yeah, I don't know. They wouldn't have the same calendar back then.
And even now, the Eastern Church is a different Easter.
Yeah, they still do. So, like, a lot of even Eastern Catholics still celebrate Easter on a different day than the Roman rite. So we calculate Easter the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. That's how we use the Roman rite to calculate Easter. But some of our Eastern brothers and sisters, they'll actually celebrate it the first full moon after the equinox. Sometimes they line up, sometimes they don't. I don't know. Is there one way better than the other? I don't know. Right. Regardless, in that way, we're still celebrating around that same time frame, even though the date could shift. Even the Passover would shift too. It wouldn't be the same date every day because it would be on their lunar calendar the same date every year. But that lunar calendar would always sync up with the solar calendar that was being done secularly. So could we go back and just do the Jewish calendar? I guess. I don't know. But even that's been kind of lost to history too, and then changed over time.
So I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
What is the difference between an atheist and an agnostic? And where do they believe when their life ends? What do they believe happens?
Yeah. I can't speak for all of them, but an atheist would be someone who believes that there is no life beyond this, that there is no deity, no immovable mover that really controls everything that happens in our lives. Right? That's an atheist. An atheist, a true atheist is just like, this life is it. There's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no purpose in it. You just kind of go and live.
And when you die, you just...
And when you die, you die. That's it. Right. No, that's not to say there's not still understanding morality, right? There's still, it's interesting that I think even an atheist would say, yeah, I should still be a good person because I should treat others the way I want to be treated. I should, not do these things to other person if I don't want to happen to me. Well, we would call that the golden rule, and that's something that's described in the 18 Human's Heart. Well, if there's a rule, it has to be a rule giver. We won't go into that debate. But that's kind of what they're saying, is that there's no rhyme or reason in this life. It's just you live it, that's it. An agnostic would probably say that they're just not sure about what's happening after this life. There's really you can't find really any evidence to say that there's an afterlife, that there's another supreme being, nor is there really evidence to say there isn't. Right? And that's what we would say the same thing. Science can either disprove nor prove the existence of God. There's no way it can do that. You're talking about a subject that's beyond anything we can actually experience here in this life. And also we just say, I just don't know. Right? I'm not convinced. I'm not sold. I think you find it very hard to find a true atheist these days. I think most people, there would be more agnostic. But we would, now from our perspective though, we would say there's salvation for both of them. Right? Because even if they're not necessarily understanding of things, of God's work in our lives, by doing good, living a moral life, they are implicitly serving God. And they're at least an implicit desire for the grace of baptism, which could lead to their salvation.
What about that you're not celebrating youth or service when they're
Right, right.
Well, avoiding all moral sins?
Yeah. So there's still a level of desire that's involved. Right. There's the theological axiom is that God works in the sacraments and He's not bound by them. You ever heard about that? Mm-hmm. So in other words, sacraments are great because we're assured of the grace given to us by God. But God being God doesn't have to work just in those ways, right? So we should receive the sacraments because we know we're receiving that grace and we're receiving the gifts from God that He wants to give to us. But an atheist or agnostic who's not really living what we would say a Christian life, as long as they're following their conscience and doing what their conscience tells them to do, they're implicitly serving God, and that we would say implicitly desiring that grace, which will be filled by God.
Serving God, they implicitly serving themselves.
Well, see, that's the problem. I can't tell you that, right? I can't tell you what a person's conscience says or what the motives of a person without them, revealing that to us. And they will be. They're serving themselves. In which case, okay. But we also trust that there's, like, the moment of anyone's death, there's a choice. That when they die, things will be revealed to them that weren't revealed on this earth, and they have a choice to choose that.
Say, oh, now I get it.
Maybe, right? But also, there's also a good argument to say that if someone is saying no their entire life and chooses something other than God the entire life, why would that be any different? In other words, if we form habits, we become accustomed to doing certain things.
But there's always enlightenment.
You're right, but that doesn't necessarily mean you make the same choice. So that goes back to who you're serving. If you get in this pattern of serving yourself over and over and over again, well, why would I go to heaven and be with God if I can go just, away from Him? I mean, choosing not God my entire life, why would I do that now? That's where I'm so far. I've had a pretty pleasurable life. So yeah, it's we have to be very careful about that decision, because we won't want to say that everyone's in heaven and there's nobody in hell, because we just don't know, right? And it is possible for someone not to choose God, even in the midst of that enlightenment. We hope that nobody's in hell, but we can't say that for sure.
So you said something that I've heard other people say, and that is kind of a second chance when you die. When you die, the Lord would say, so here I am, now, what's your decision?
Yeah, and what we would say the church would teach is all is required for that salvation is conviction. Right.
Before or after death?
Yeah,
Good answer.
right? I mean, so who's to say at the moment of someone's death they don't repent? I mean, there's a great adage: "There's no atheist in foxholes," right? And so I think when you're faced with your immortality, there's at least a doubt that maybe the life you were living wasn't the best life. Maybe there is something past what we're just experiencing. I hope that's the case for everybody.
It
Right.
should be. No matter where you fall on
Right.
the spectrum, everybody can do
I
better.
hope so. I hope so. Now, can someone say, no, I don't believe that, this is it, game over, done? Yeah, I guess. But even after their death, when Jesus revealed, we are all going to stand before God in Jesus Christ. He's going to judge us. And all that's necessary for that positive judgment, we are saying, oh, in the glory and the revelation of what you see, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I did. That'd be enough. Now, we as Catholics would say, well, yeah, I'd probably spend some time in purgatory. Right? Because the offenses you made here on earth, you'd still be very paid back in some way. But anyone in purgatory is destined for heaven.
But if you're not Catholic, but Christian, and you don't believe in purgatory, is there a purgatory?
Yeah. Just because you don't
They don't
believe
believe
in
in
it.
it.
Yeah, well,
We do. They don't, so they will tell you that there is none, and we say there is.
well, we would say we'll all find out, right? I mean, regardless of whether there is or isn't, I think there's good reason to say there is. That's not only biblically established, but also just from a rational standpoint, it makes sense. I mean, it goes back to Jesus says, "Be perfect, your heavenly Father is perfect." Well, I don't fit that mold. I'm not there. That means I'm going to hell? Well, I hope not. So, I would hope there's a place I can actually become perfect. And that would be purgatory. So I would say our Protestant brother, it's not just biblical, but I think it makes sense. And you can, if you don't want to believe in purgatory, okay, fine. But when judgment comes, you're going to find out anyway. But you're still destined for heaven either way. So good. Who cares?
So what does the apostolic pardon do?
So the apostolic pardon remits temporal punishment for a person. And what that means is that if that person has committed, first off, they'd be forgiven their sins through either absolution or through anointing. And then the apostolic pardon will remit their temporal sins. So it would basically be like a plenary indulgence. All their sins, the effects of their sin would be taken away. And they could enter into heaven. But also, that would have to be received by the person who has been given to. Right? So, in other words, I can apply the apostolic pardon, but there's not that trust and belief in it. It doesn't have the effect.
Does that have to happen when a person is conscious?
No. Nope. Nope. Not at all. And really, even then, if the person's unconscious, you have to be sure there was no. The way we kind of have confidence that the person before they went under became unconscious never said anything contrary to faith or did anything that was contrary to apostasy or anything like that. So we would trust the grace would still work, but ultimately it's up to the person receiving it, and really the person giving it, make sure it's good about it. But yeah, that'd be. It's a very powerful thing. It's actually kind of a beautiful thing too.
Then you get the $200 and you go straight to you don't go to purgatory.
we would trust that to be the case. Provided that person hasn't committed any sin between the time the pardon is given and the time of their death. Yeah.
But typically it's given.
It should be. And so that's always a prudential judgment, because I've had several occasions where I've walked in and it's like, oh, this is it. And I've given it and the person recovered. Okay, that's fine. But yeah, it should be that really should be given at the last minute. Just because you want to make sure that that person is given that full grace and pardon.
Could they receive it again?
Sure, of course. Yeah, right, yeah. So in that case, like, I wouldn't like, oh, sorry, I already gave you once, that's it. There's your one get out of jail free card, that's dope. You give it, you can still give it multiple times. But it should be reserved for the time. Yeah, it should be.
What would warrant giving it or not giving it? What's the deciding?
Yeah, so again, a lot comes down to prudential judgment of the minister. So let's say if I went into a hospital, someone called me to get anointing to do what they call viaticum. So I had confession, I had the Eucharist with me, and Holy Oils for anointing. If they're conscious, I would actually ask if they want to hear their confession. I would then anoint them and give them communion. And then depending on what state they're in. So if they're like completely out, right, and they're on ventilation and they're unconscious and they're being have a feeding tube, I probably would give it then, right? Because I don't know exactly when this person will die, but it doesn't look too good.
If you've not met them before, how do you know?
I usually try to talk to the doctor. I usually talk to the doctor or the nurse too. That usually is taking care of them.
Like they could have repeat moral sins intentionally, and they just get cleared.
Yeah. Well, what are you talking about? Like in the temporal, when I give the Well, but here's the thing: anointing also forgives them their sins too. Right. So I have to anoint them first. I can't just say, okay, here's your apostolic pardon, bye. Right.
Yeah.
I'd have to like anoint them or hear their confession first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if they're out and can't give you the confession,
right. Well, if they're out, I would anoint them either way, and then give them the apostolic pardon. But I actually tell you the truth now, you can't get the apostolic pardon separate from that though. But again, it goes down to the receiver. So the person, if they're a state to receive it, they will. But if not, there's still some grace given to them, but they may not actually be able to go right to heaven. It depends on the state of the soul of the person. Because there was one time during COVID, I just gave the apostolic pardon over the phone. Because that's the only thing I could do. And so I trusted that person was. I actually heard their confession and this has been like the week before. And they were on a ventilator the entire time. So I kind of just like, okay, I don't know how much trouble you did, but here you go. So it comes down to just doing the best you can. For the most part. But even then, I still anointed them and did everything beforehand. So.
Has there always been an apostolic pardon? I never heard of it before you talked to it.
As far as I know, but I think what it was, so there wasn't necessarily a distinction between viaticum and extreme unction, right? So back in the day, when you talk about anointing, it was extreme unction, and so whenever a priest came to anoint someone, that usually like and they would make that part of the rite anyway. I think there's a better understanding now that anointing can be done multiple times, for specific reasons, and it should be. But not every time you receive anointing does you have to receive the apostolic pardon, right? Typically, if you go under some anesthesia, that's usually a criteria to say we should give you the anointing, but not necessarily apostolic pardon.
Okay, the difference in the anointing is the same in the sacrament of the sick.
Yes. Okay. So we have anointing of the sick, right? Which is a separate rite, right? That's the anointing of the person, and the prayer. Everything goes along with that. But you can add confession and the Eucharist. That becomes viaticum, right? So if I hear someone's confession, anoint them, give them communion. That's viaticum, right? But viaticum can be done multiple times too, right? There's no reason you can't do that. But if someone's at the moment of their death, the celebrant, the minister, would have the information whether the apostolic pardon would be given. And that we usually call like last rites, for lack of a better term. Right? But I think probably back in the day, it was all put together because that's the only time priests would come was when they're on their deathbed. Right? So that would be the main difference. So yes, there always has been an apostolic pardon, but it may have been separated from the rite before because of the circumstance there.
The first time I heard it from Father Chris was here,
Yeah.
he included it in a homily.
Yeah, the apostolic pardon. Yeah.
And he said, if you, or especially any of your relatives, older relatives, make sure you ask for it.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, I don't think necessarily you should ask for it. I think the minister should automatically do that, but it's always good.
Yeah, it's always what I try to do is I try to ascertain. Okay, what is the state of the person? I usually try to talk to the nurse or doctor that's there or the family. Usually the family they call, they say, "I want last rites." That means apostolic pardon. Okay, so you get that. But it's funny because sometimes though you walk in and the person's like, "Oh, very conscious," and they're like, "Oh, okay. Are you sure this is what you want? Because you seem fine." I don't know, right? So I'm probably trying to get a second opinion at that point. I still give the sacrament, I may not give the apostolic pardon basically.
So they could ask you to come, and they didn't really need you.
No, they wanted to come, but maybe they thought, for whatever reason, they maybe thought that,
Scared.
or a lot of times the terminology is so intertwined, they don't really know what to ask for. So they say last rites. Okay. So that's why I usually get there and try to explain, like, this is what this is, what do you really want? And then kind of go from there. Yeah, there's been a few times I asked to come to last rites, it's like, you don't want last rites. You want viaticum, I'll give you viaticum, that's fine, but you don't want last rites.
And I would assume that there is a to-go bag, if you will, with your stuff when you go to the hospital.
I keep my oils and my stoles in my car on a holy order in the book. The only thing I don't keep in my car is the Eucharist, so I can keep the picks. So I can get it into it. Yeah, I just get out of it. That's
What is it?
yeah, so the little container they put the Eucharist
Oh,
in.
yeah.
PYX picks.
But you still have to go and, like Aaron has one where she
Yeah, I just gotta go to
puts
the tabernacle. I
hose,
just go to the tabernacle. I just whatever you get it.
but aren't they supposed to be like immediately used or like 4 hours or something like that?
I don't know about that. Well, yeah, you're supposed to. So, if you're a minister, you should go out. Let's say if you go through come to communion and get a Eucharist, and you should go immediately and go distribute that to the
Right.
person. But
So
also,
they're not just sitting in there waiting for
yeah,
you to grab
exactly
and go.
right.
There's
Yeah, no,
some
no.
sort of
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So typically, most extraordinary ministers should know how to do it. The only problem is in order to get it from the tabernacle, you have to have the key in the sacristy in order to combination.
Yeah.
I don't think everyone has one of those, but if they come to communion, they can get it, and then if they let's say they come like maybe 6 o'clock mass, do communion. They're not seeing the person until let's say noon. Well, okay, but you have to keep that pix on them at all times.
Right.
You can't just like lose track of you. You want to do that, make sure you're roughly there with them. So again, it comes down to circumstances. Ideally, you should distribute the Eucharist as soon as you get it. So in other words, I get it in the communion line. I'm going directly to grandma's house. But like that all depends on circumstances. If there's a question, I would just talk to the priest. Figure out what would be prudent and proper.
And they never get the blood then because
No.
there's no way to transport that. So
There's
it's-
so priests can it's how do I put this? I can celebrate the mass and incorporate all those in mass at someone's bedside. And if I were to do that, I'd probably give them the blood too, if they're capable of receiving. But yeah, we don't have like vials and stuff to do things.
Yeah.
You could though. There is ways you could do it, but it gets messy, and it's probably more prudent not to. We kind of talk about liquids, especially the question of blood of Jesus. Yeah, you don't know.
Food just go.
Yeah, in that way,
Just go.
right? Yeah. So yeah, you always got to take prudence. Always is the kind of the guiding principle of these things. And we're trained in the seminary to kind of look at these things, but even that is not completely cut and dry all the time. I talk to my brother priests a lot, including the Monsignors, and it's like, so what do you guys like? What's the usual civil criteria you have to give it the apostolic pardon? Because even like doctor stuff, like, oh yeah, she doesn't want to, or he doesn't want to. Okay, what does that mean? We're talking about like a month? We're talking about like tomorrow? You know? And even then, there was one I walked in, it was just like, can you guarantee me this person's going to last the night? Well, no, I can't do that. Okay, so I probably should do it. And you always want to be generous with the sacrament. And so that's usually my default. If there's any question, I do it. I think most priests probably follow that.
You can schedule when you're on call, or how does that work?
We have an emergency line here at the seminary, at the rectory, and for sacramental emergencies, I think it's in the bulletin, and or on the webpage. And yeah, just call them and say, oh.
Do you know when you're going to be the one that has to go? Like, is there? So it can be any time.
So who answered that? Well, I mean, but a human being
Yes,
answered it?
yes, yes.
That's good.
Yes. Yeah, actually, a lot of places have like a system. So the call come in, it'll go on that emergency line, go directly to a priest, either office phone or a cell phone. And then if they don't answer, it goes to another priest's cell phone, or they have it set that way. And that's a really good system.
Yeah.
And then that way you make sure that you're always covered. Well, I've never gotten any late. I do it one time late night, but usually it's not like overnight. Usually kind of.
Like 3 o'clock.
No, I think most people kind of realize like that they get everyone. They kind of get involved early enough. I think it works out. At least here, that's been my experience.
So then, in our case, that human that answers, then we call, and if you're doing mass and don't answer, then they call the next person, and it's a very manual process.
This one is, yeah. I mean, it's been working so far.
Yeah.
So, I think if I were running the parish, I probably would set up that system though, just because. I think if you're only a priest, you go to you anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, well, if I'm not available, I'm not available, but you try getting back with me.
Yeah, I really would have a separate phone for that.
Yeah, there's different systems and
Like
ways to do
being
it.
on call at a hospital.
Yeah,
Like they have a pager.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just the way we have it set up here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It works.
Yeah.
What if you get to the person and you
Well, yeah, that's always a struggle because there's really not much I can bless the body and maybe pray with the family there, but also too, canon law dictates that you can apply the sacraments up to 2 hours after the death of the person, maybe it's an hour after the death of the person, and part of that's because there's not really good understanding of when the soul actually leaves the body.
Mm-hmm.
So up to an hour, I probably still would administer at least anointing. Right.
Do you ever get in a situation where the family's frustrated that you didn't get there sooner?
I've had a family ask me in the funeral if I can anoint the body, and I was like, no, I can't. And that would just start kind of heartbreaking too, because like we didn't know the person was really that sick and didn't know what was going on, and we were kind of kept out of the loop, and then all of a sudden we got a notification the person died. And so it was like, oh, well, okay. And so we actually I met with the family, they asked me if I could do some anointing of the person then. I was like, well, sacraments are for the living. I can't. We trust using God's hands. I mean, I told him the same thing. God works in the sacraments, he's not bound by them. And so we trust this person because of the life they live. They're faithful. And, we're probably in God's hands now. So we trust that. But then at the funeral, they asked me again. It's like, God can bless the body. So we're going to do that in a minute anyway here at the funeral. So, those are kind of heartbreaking in a way because you want to help them, but it's like, I can't tell you a lie. And this will be a lie. And then became that sacrament. But yeah, that's only really, I never really had anyone upset that I haven't gotten there early enough because usually if it's I usually ask them right away, like, is this something that you need right now, or is there time or what's going on? And usually I ascertain that when I just get the phone call. And so I have to leave right away, I'll leave right away. But usually I would say, even if it's like later, I usually try to leave within about an hour or get the call. So I get over and do it. Good.
I have a question.
Wonderful.
What kind of training do you soon-to-be priests get in hearing confessions? And does the seminary provide you guidance as to penance, what your responses should be, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah.
And then, well, I'm thinking, I mean, some of your fellow classmates come with a script that says A, B, C, D, E.
I don't know about that.
I can walk me through it.
Yeah, so obviously we have a class that's on penance and anointing. That's actually like a theological class, right? Like what the sacrament is, what it comes from, history, what we believe as a church, what it does, and all kinds of stuff. Matter, form, recipient, ministry. But then we actually go through what we call a practicum when we're deacons on penance. So what it is another priest would be the penitent, and you're the hearer. And it's scripted, and they don't tell you what the situation is ahead of time.
Right.
But they come in and say, bless God, I've sinned. It's been 3 years since I left confession, whatever. I remember one was completely different for me, difficult for me. The priest came in and said, well, I'm a very prominent politician. Well, I did give you some background. They say the person is a politician that supports like abortion. Okay. And so the guy came in and was like, okay, well, yeah, I did this and this, and I'm like, okay. So I get through the I think it was something like trivia, like I maybe took some money from people I shouldn't have taken, and I said some bad language, and whatever. I'm like, okay. And so I give him some counsel. I was like, well, the Lord loves you. We do kind of go through that kind of aspect, like we should say. But again, a lot of that's really kind of like they told us, let the Spirit kind of lead you in those things. And so we get to the penance. I said, okay, well, how about you say 3 Hail Marys for the unborn? And then the person says, oh, well, I can't do that, Father. I'm like, oh, why not? Like, well, I'm actually a big supporter of abortion rights, and I don't feel comfortable praying for the unborn. I'm like, okay, well, you realize that's a sin too, right? Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't believe what the Catholic Church believes about it. And he's like, well, and so I said, are you sorry you're not sorry? I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't absolve you. Well, then I'll go talk to the pastor. Like, you go do what you have to do, but I need some contrition here to actually resolve it. I mean, and that's exactly how it went. And actually, they said, good, good job.
So I guess my follow-on question would be: is somebody grading you? Not necessarily to give you a grade, but to say,
yeah. So we actually get a grade in that class, and part of that's dependent on like what our counsel was. Does our penance kind of fit the crime, or in some ways?
So is there somebody else listening to this?
Oh yeah, everyone else. Like we have actually several other seminarians and priests are listening.
To the
right.
whole,
the whole thing, right? Exactly. Yeah, and give a critique. So I probably would handle it this way, and it really is great. It's it's really good. A good class to kind of get that because. I think for me that was one of the things. Like I coming in seminary, I was kind of wondering about the whole. How do you forget this stuff? You hear it, and what you don't realize after you're ordained is like, oh, you hear it all. You hear it all over, and it just becomes white noise after a while. It's like, oh, okay, you forget it.
And how many different variations
Well,
of it are there? There's like so many.
You forget it almost immediately.
We've heard it all.
Yeah,
before.
and so it's like that's why like I don't know what you did because I mean there's probably 50 other people that did the same thing, right? So I don't know.
But your memory is great. Like I went in with a list. I have like 6 things on it, and he sent them back to me in the order I said them. And I was like, I asked Craig, I was like, is he writing that down back there? How did you remember like things?
Oh, me?
Like you, yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I mean,
No.
you said them in the exact order.
I actually think it's just actually part of. It's really the grace of the sacrament. I think it's really that's the only answer I can have for you. It's just that. It's not me. It's Jesus working through me, and so I don't know. I just trust in that grace, and so that's that's did do so far pretty well. But yeah, we do have formal preparation. Really, any sacrament that we have some formal preparation. So, like when we're deacons, we do baptismal training and assisting at the mass and actually mass practicum. Anointing, we have anointing practicum, all that kind of stuff too. So, and we're getting critiqued and graded on these things, just like with homiletics, same thing.
Is there continuing education ever?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you have to go back and redo certain things.
No, I mean it's not like for certification, but the Archdiocese offers certain things. Like, for instance, we have these study weeks. So, like this last one was usually it's in October. We talk about the Gospel of Luke because that's coming up for the next cycle. Mm-hmm. So it's really more directed at homiletics. But we had someone come talk to us about like blessings, like the nature of blessings, and kind of developments on the expanding of that theology and what that actually means. So yeah, those opportunities are out there for the Archdiocese, but these are always optional. I think most guys go through this because it's really good camaraderie. It's kind of an opportunity to meet other priests and hang out and see each other. But also you learn something. So.
I would assume that once you graduate and become a priest, there's still OJT because you haven't gone through every.
Oh, of course.
I mean, have you gone through all of the Easter celebrations?
Right. Yeah. Well, I will say liturgically speaking, I guess I got kind of a leg up because my first assignment was as the master of ceremonies of the cathedral, and so I kind of got a lot of crash course on that stuff anyway. But even so, there's still a lot of right. There's a lot of like like for instance, I haven't been celebrated for Holy Thursday or for Good Friday, and usually the pastor does that anyway, so it's fine. Sure. But when I'm a pastor, I'm like, well, okay, how do we do this? Right? But yeah, there's always a constant like, okay, like even for like the Christmas Vigil, I had to kind of like figure out, okay, there's no rubric for like the blessing of the crib, right? There's nothing in the book that says go over there, bless the crib, and do this, right? So you're kind of you are, and part of this is like, what's the proper time to do these things? What makes sense? What's the most reasonable? And then you just kind of do that. So, it's kind of, but you're right, it is kind of a developing thing. But also, too, I think it's important to maintain that, too, because, there's development in certain doctrines and theologies that kind of, grow. And so it's always good to be kind of mindful of those things. So, yeah, it's always kind of interesting. Great. All right, well, it's 7:45 now. Well, thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. No, I think I can make it work. We have Friends from Faith next week, and I'm still open to suggestions for the topic. I don't know.
What day is that?
That's always Tuesday, so it's the first Tuesday.
Oh.
So that's actually more of a discussional, like on a particular topic.
Is that replaced by the Father?
Yeah. So no, it's the same thing as Father the Father, except it's more. It's talking about a particular topic instead of like an open discussion. So I'm trying to figure out what to talk about for that night. Let's see. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know. If you have enough, please fill an hour. All right. Well, thank you all for listening, coming, and we'll see you guys. We just had one person. Looks like, but I don't know.